Welcome back. We are on Judges chapter 8 today, and we're picking up from the battle with Gideon and the 300 soldiers from yesterday. Okay, verse 1. Then the men of Ephraim said to him, "What is this thing you have done to us, not calling us when you went to fight against Midian?" And they contended with him vigorously. But he said to them, "What have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God has given the leaders of Midian, Oreb, and Zeb into your hands. And what was I able to do in comparison with you?" Then their anger toward him subsided when he said that. So the men of Ephraim resented being slighted in the call to battle. Gideon's figures of speech implied that the Ephraimite slaying of the two fleeing Midianite leaders in chapter 7, verse 25, was the vintage of Ephraim, to use an image drawn from their grape horticulture. It played a more strategic role than taking part in the vintage of Abiezer, the suicide of the enemy under Gideon's leadership. Then Gideon and the 300 men who were with him came to the Jordan and crossed over, weary yet pursuing. He said to the men of Succoth, "Please give loaves of bread to the people who are following me, for they are weary, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." The leaders of Succoth said, "Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hands, that we should give bread to your army?" Gideon said, "All right, when the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will thrash your bodies with the horns of the wilderness and with briars." There's a couple ways he could have communicated that, but I think that was effective. Verse 8. He went up from there to Penuel and spoke similarly to them. And the men of Penuel answered him just as the men of Succoth had answered. So he spoke also to the men of Penuel, saying, "When I return safely, I will tear down this tower." He's basically like, "Fine, you won't help feed my starving and beat up army? Then when I come back, I'm going to bring the pain on you." Verse 10. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and their armies with them, about 15,000 men, all who were left of the entire army of the sons of the east, for the fallen were 120,000 swordsmen. Gideon went up by the way of those who lived in tents on the east of Nobah and Jogbehah, and attacked the camp when the camp was unexpecting. When Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued them and captured the two kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and routed the whole army. Then Gideon the son of Joash returned from the battle by the ascent, or pass, of Heres, and he captured a youth from Succoth and questioned him. Then the youth wrote down for him the princes of Succoth and its elders, 77 men. So these were the folks in the beginning of this chapter that wouldn't help feed his army. Verse 15. He came to the men of Succoth and said, "Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, concerning whom you taunted me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your men who are weary?" Payback time. He took the elders of the city, and thorns of the wilderness and briars, and he disciplined the men of Succoth with them. He tore down the tower of Penuel, and killed the men of the city. Don't be messing with Gideon. Verse 18. Then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, "What kind of men were they whom you killed at Tabor?" And they said, "They were like you, each one resembling the son of a king." He said, "They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if only you had let them live, I would not kill you." So he said to Jether his firstborn, "Rise, kill them." But the youth did not draw his sword, for he was afraid, because he was still a youth. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Rise up yourself and fall on us, for as the man, so is his strength." So Gideon arose and killed Zebah and Zalmunna, and took the crescent ornaments which were on their camels' necks. These were spoils of war, and Gideon executing capital punishment on these guys goes hand in hand with the avenger of blood for murdered family members discussed in Deuteronomy chapter 19. And I guess a trial was not necessary because the Midianites had turned against Israel, and these two openly admitted that they were guilty. Verse 22. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, "Rule over us, both you and your son, also your son's son, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian." But Gideon said to them, "I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." How great is that? Verse 24. Yet Gideon said to them, "I would request of you that each of you give me an earring from his spoil. For they had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. They said, we will surely give them. So they spread out a garment, and every one of them threw an earring there from his spoil. The weight of the gold earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, or about 40 pounds. Besides the crescent ornaments and the pendants and the purple robes which were on the kings of Midian, and besides the neckbands that were on their camels' necks. Gideon made it into an ephod, and placed it in his city, Ophrah, and all Israel played the harlot with it there, so that it became a snare to Gideon and his household. An ephod again was a sleeveless garment worn by the priests, and somehow the Israelites found a way to idolize it as usual. All right, here we go. So Midian was subdued before the sons of Israel, and they did not lift up their heads any more. And the land was undisturbed for 40 years in the days of Gideon. Then Jerubbaal, the son of Joash, went and lived in his own house. Now Gideon had 70 sons who were his direct descendants, for he had many wives. His concubine who was in Shechem also bore him a son, and he named him Abimelech. And Gideon the son of Joash died at a ripe old age, and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash, in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. Then it came about, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the sons of Israel again played the harlot with the Baals, and made Baal-berith their god. Thus the sons of Israel did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them from the hands of all their enemies on every side, nor did they show kindness to the household of Jerubbaal, that is, Gideon, in accord with all the good that he had done to Israel. Nice way to repay him. So same old song and dance. And it's been a while since we went over the discussion of polygamist relationships in the Old Testament. So let's take a look at that again. I did talk about it in Genesis chapters 4 and 22 if you want to revisit those. But since it's been a while, I'm going to read an article from one of my favorite ministries called CARM, which stands for Christian Apologetics and Research Ministries. Matt Slick is the author. Okay, here we go. God allowed polygamy as well as divorce in the Old Testament because of the hardness of people's hearts, as is clearly stated in Matthew chapter 19, verse 8. God never approved of polygamy, nor did he intend it to be the norm. In fact, he specifically said not to have more than one wife because, in part, they can turn a person's heart away from God. Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 17 says, "He shall not multiply wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away, nor shall he greatly increase silver and gold for himself." Nevertheless, God permitted polygamy, just as he permits people to do other sinful acts. Lamech was the first to have more than one wife in Genesis chapter 4, but he was a wicked man and a murderer. Abraham had more than one wife, seen in Genesis chapter 16, and because of it, there were lots of problems. Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines, seen in 1 Kings chapter 11, and he started serving false gods. Gideon had many wives, as we saw today, and his son Abimelech will turn out to be no bueno. David had many wives, and there were problems because of it. Elkanah had 2 wives in the book of 1 Samuel, and there was a bitterness because of it. And Rehoboam had 18 wives and 60 concubines in 2 Chronicles chapter 11, and they forsook the law of God. The standard that God established in the Garden of Eden was monogamy, one man and one woman. Genesis chapter 1 verse 27 says, "God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them." God did not create multiple people, but only one man and one woman, and from them, in that bond of marriage, was the means to have families and fill the earth. God goes on to say in Genesis chapter 2 verse 24, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." The principle is in the New Testament as well. Matthew chapter 19 verses 4 through 5 says, "And he answered and said, Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verse 2 says, "But because of immoralities each man is to have his own wife, and each woman is to have her own husband." Ephesians chapter 5 verse 31, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, and shall be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. 1 Timothy chapter 3 verse 2 says, an overseer then must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, and able to teach. So, polygamy was permitted by God in the Old Testament, but it was not his design. The results led people astray and caused dissension within households where multiple wives were present. It does not properly represent the relationship between Christ and his bride, the church, which is seen in Ephesians chapter 5. He does not have multiple brides. He has one bride. So like everything else, throw people in the mix and things get messed up. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it and hope to see you tomorrow. Have a great day. God bless you.